In the recent programs that I've made, I've examined a lot of different things to do with Scotland and also looked at the future of the country, as well as what has been happening with most of its parties. Now, one of the parties which I found it hardest to actually get a grip on is Alba. So I thought I would concentrate a little bit more of my attention today on the Alba party and what it's been up to recently. Now, having looked at social media for quite a long time and trying to search for positive posts from Alba and neglecting to read some of the internecine squabbling that's going on between some people who post on social media like X, and actually focusing more on what the party is planning to do right now. It's very obvious to me, at least, that Alba is at a bit of a turning point because since Alex Salmond's untimely death, there has been a little bit of paralysis, I believe, in Alba about its future direction. Now, Alba was founded by Alex Salmond. There was already a party there, the so-called AFI, the Alliance for Independence, which was already an agglomeration of smaller parties before Alex Salmond became its leader and transformed it into Alba. Now, having said all of that, Alba was also co-founded by Mr. Salmond's longtime friend and political cohort member, which is, of course, Kenny McCaskill. Now, Kenny McCaskill is a well-known figure as he was the Justice Minister under the first administration of Mr. Salmond and had to deal with some extremely difficult international situations, especially regarding the release of the prisoner who was held to account for the bombing of the Pan Am flight. So Mr. McCaskill has had to make some difficult decisions in the past when he was Justice Minister, but he also knows extremely well what Alex Salmond's vision was for what Alba should become. Now, we all know that Alba formed as the SNP fractured, and I think it's fair to say that the trial against Mr. Salmond was viewed as a political smear, not just by the unionist side, but also by some members of his own party. And so, having fractured off in this way and formed a new party, Mr. Salmond and Mr. McCaskill have basically, I think, tried to get the party centred to the left in politics, because I believe that they detected that the SNP was moving to a managerial centre-right position in terms of political alliance or alignment, beg your pardon, and therefore there was a gap, if you like, in the market for a left-of-centre independent party. Now that has continued up until the time of Mr. Salmond's death. The party has largely been centre-left in its attitudes to independence, but also been a little bit Eurosceptic in that it differs from the SNP in terms of how Scotland, once it is independent, should trade and have relations with the European Union. Now, the favoured position, I believe, from Alba, and reading particularly Neil Hanvey's posts online recently, seems to suggest that Alba favours EFTA, the European Free Trade Association, as a means for an independent Scotland to re-establish trade, travel and other links with the European Union at a far less problematic level than a full rejoining of the European Union, which Alba suggests is likely to be far too complicated for a newly independent Scotland. Now, I have to declare my own bias here, and I actually do favour Alba's position on this, that Scotland would be better, once independent, to use the European Free Trade Association to re-establish its trading and formal foreign affairs links with the European Union. However, having said all of that, that leaves us with a bit of a problem, because now that Mr. Salmond has died and left a power vacuum, Kenny McCaskill has now decided to throw his hat in the ring and challenge the so far only other contestant in the leadership challenge, and that is Ash Regan. Now, Ash Regan is a little bit harder to read as political analysis goes. However, from what she has been saying recently, I believe that Ash Regan is more of a centre-right politician. She has, or appears to have, a bias towards trade with the United States. It's something I'll return to a little later in the programme. So the party is now, or Party of Alba is now engaged in a leadership contest between Mr. McCaskill and Ms. Regan, and the differences between the two seem to be quite distinctive, I would say. Kenny intends to keep Alba as Alex Salmond intended it, and there are many within the Alba party who are in this camp, who believe that Alex Salmond's vision of Scotland as a centre-left country with strong links with the European Union but not full membership is an attractive proposition for many Alba members when they're voting for a leader. Ash Regan's recent comments seem to indicate that she favours, in one particular instance, inviting Elon Musk to open a new gigafactory to manufacture Tesla cars in Scotland. Now, on the face of it, this doesn't seem like that bad an idea. The idea of Scotland having a car industry, again, and remember we did have one up until the 1970s, is an attractive proposition. However, is Mr. Musk, as the CEO, is he still the CEO of Tesla? Who knows? But anyway, as a major shareholder in Tesla, he has enormous power. And those of you who witnessed Donald Trump's inauguration yesterday will know that Mr. Trump is very far right of centre, despite his renowned genius as, well, I think we would say as a self-educated engineer in setting up SpaceX, having remarkable success there as well as at Tesla. Shows that Mr. Musk is a brilliant man, but he has some worrying tendencies. I don't know if you watched the whole inauguration ceremony yesterday, but two things stood out to me as being out of place. Now, the first one was to do with Mr. Trump. As he was taking the oath of office, his wife was holding two Bibles, one of which was a traditional Bible used for the swearing in of presidents, and the other one was a gift, I believe, to Mr. Trump personally. Now, at no time during the time he was swearing his oath of office did he ever place his hand on that Bible, despite invoking God on several occasions in his speech after his inauguration. And I'm wondering whether this was a sign, if you like, that that Mr. Trump was, I would say, theologically crossing his fingers while he made that that speech, or at least most of it anyway. He was very combative. He had a go at his political opponents and then basically embarrassed them in front of everybody and announced that he was sending troops to the southern border with Mexico, a worrying sign. However, after all this was over, and this is where we get to Elon Musk, Musk was standing in a little cohort of super billionaires, all tech billionaires together, including Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, also the CEO of Google, as well as Mr. Musk himself. But what happened after the inauguration is what interested me. During a massive public event held in a stadium in Washington, I believe, Mr. Musk leapt on stage and proceeded to give a sort of bizarre dad dance, I think is the only way I can describe it, followed by what you can only interpret as several Nazi salutes. I'm talking about the old Sieg Heil salutes. He did this 2 or 3 times in front of the audience. Now again, this was very much out of step with the rest of the event. We had gone from the pomp and ceremony of a democratic and a peaceful transfer of power from one politician to another, to this dancing, Nazi saluting mega billionaire leaping about on stage. This is the man who has tasked himself with eradicating inefficiency in American government. Now, I mentioned Mr. Musk because Ash Regan also mentioned him in one of her recent statements, and she had said that she favoured inviting Tesla to set up a car factory in Scotland after independence. Now, yeah, I said it might actually be useful to have a car factory, but is Elon Musk the man we really want to be cozying up to here? Now, the word cozying up, I'm using this very much in keeping with a lot of other political figures who have been mentioning things like cozying up, particularly in respect to Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, who I believe is making a speech this morning, which I have not yet seen. However, I don't think any Labour politician would be doing much cozying to somebody like Mr. Musk or indeed Donald Trump. The inauguration of Trump seemed to be a massive party, a victory celebration of multi-billionaires whose plan to dominate the world from America seemed to be the theme of Donald Trump's new presidency, making America great again in the process, while making themselves even wealthier than before. So let's get back to Scotland. Kenny McCaskill or Ash Regan? Well, frankly, I think the members of Alba may favour Kenny McCaskill. Nobody can be sure about this. Ash Regan has an attractive proposition here. She is also young, and I'd say you'd have to say she is ambitious for the task and has proved herself an able speaker on many occasions and does have her own following. And I would suggest maybe particularly amongst women, because there are very few women leaders in politics in the UK or in Scotland itself. The only female political leader we've had much experience of has of course been Nicola Sturgeon, who has been much in the media recently. However, Alba is standing at a crossroads. It has to decide what it is going to be before it starts its general election campaign. I hope that it is going to be what it is at the moment, which is a centre-left party which does not do deals with multi-billionaires who dance around giving Nazi salutes. That is something which I feel most of us would agree with. So Ash Regan maybe made her statements before this particular dance routine and the Sieg-heiling Mr. Musk appeared on their screens, and so maybe didn't realise that that was going to happen. However, it has kind of dampened people's enthusiasm for what she's suggesting. However, if Alba is to be successful, I think it has to remain true to its roots. Alex Salmond's vision of a centre-left Scotland with a progressive government is a good idea. Now, I've also read this morning a long piece by Robin McAlpine about why people in Scotland hate politicians. It is a wonderful read, and I recommend it to you. Essentially, what he is saying is that the reason why people in Scotland hate politicians is because they are largely managerial staff, doing managerial tasks, increasing bureaucracy, and at the same time setting unrealistic targets for the few people who are actually doing the work to try to achieve, and they just keep doing that. This is something which I feel Alba could be taking advantage of. This pissed off feeling that people have towards politicians, and it prompts us all to make a decision about how we vote in 2026. Do we want more bureaucracy? Do we want more rules? Do we want, for example, teachers to have to risk assess a child's sandpit in a kindergarten? Or do we want to relax these ridiculous rules and boot out a lot of the bureaucrats and actually start making some political progress which benefits the people themselves, rather than continuing this managerial theme of seeming to be competent, setting targets, not meeting them, and then blaming the people who they have underfunded by having constant reviews and commissions looking at why targets weren't met. The whole thing is basically a vicious cycle of spending and wasting money on all kinds of commissions, investigations, outside bodies, private sector companies doing things which could be done quite easily by local authorities or central government. All of this is worth remembering, and I hope that Alba has a look at that as well and takes that into account when they produce their election manifesto. Don't know what the manifesto will be, but I thought it was worth having a look at Alba today. But as I say, if Kenny McCaskill wins, and to be honest with you, I am biased here and I hope he does. I don't have anything against Ash Regan particularly at all, but I think Kenny has a much clearer vision of what Alba ought to be, and I believe that many of its members probably agree with him. If Alba remains true to Alex Salmond's original intentions, then it will become what the SNP used to be before the Sturgeon era of managerialism and the avoidance of independence began way back when. Now, if that's the case, then I think Alba has a good chance of taking a good number of list seats. They may also be targeting some swing seats in the first vote, and I wish them well, because I think the SNP needs to be challenged by somebody who has independence at the heart of their political manifesto, Now, before you jump on me and say, but what about ISP? They also, the Independence for Scotland Party, have independence front and centre, and also women's rights. And on this particular, or these two particular issues, I believe both parties, both Alba and ISP, are largely in harmony. My question is, if McCaskill wins this leadership election, is he going, as I hope he will, to invite the entire pro-independence movement to join with Alba in a concerted push to provide some well-needed competition to the SNP in the next general election? I'm not saying bad things about the SNP here. The facts are the facts. But the truth be told, and I think Robin McAlpine has summed this up very well, the Scottish Government is stuck in a rut of managerialism and managed decline, where we have a political class which thinks it's always right, which starts bureaucracies up whenever there's an issue to be solved. Rather than solving the issue, they'll set a target which can't be achieved and then hold a commission into why it wasn't, all of which wastes enormous sums of money. I'm hoping that McCaskill can weed that out, and hopefully if we get a pro-independence outright majority in Holyrood next year, there will be a large cohort of non-SNP pro-independence MSPs there to force the issue. So when it comes to making a decision about having another referendum, and if the SNP is wavering, then if it needs the support of ISP, ALBA and independent MSPs, then there will be a cost to that, and that cost will be to hold a referendum. Without that balancing element in the Scottish Parliament, I don't believe the SNP is going to move quickly towards a referendum soon, as John Swinney said, and soon means nothing really. It's not a word that conveys any kind of time frame whatsoever. But for a referendum to happen requires political will and courage, and at the moment I don't see that in the current SNP government. Anyway, those are my observations for today. The worrying things, I think, coming from the Trump administration already are twofold. The first one, I think, and probably one of the most important, is the idea that he should take the United States out of NATO. Now, NATO has, I can't remember how many countries are in it, but it must be around 30. And in the post-war period, it guaranteed peace between ourselves and the Soviet Union, as it then was. And with Russia now almost bankrupt from its 3-year war in Ukraine, it's very unlikely, I think, that any kind of nuclear exchange will ever happen. However, that brings me to the point about nuclear weapons. Will the United States withdrawing from NATO mean that their nuclear missiles, and this is not the bombs incidentally, the missile system which carries those warheads to their targets belongs to the United States, but is installed in British submarines which are based in Scotland? Will those nuclear missiles be taken back? Will they have to be sold to the United Kingdom? And what will happen with the United Kingdom's so-called nuclear deterrent? Nobody really knows. And the other thing I think which is important is Musk is a well-known climate change denier, and he is planning to take the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, which commits all the countries who signed it to scale back their global emissions of CO2 and also of other pollutant gases such as methane or methane. So it's going to be a changed world. America is basically set up now to become a hyper-polluting, extremely closed kind of country where imports into the United States are going to be taxed extremely highly. America is planning to reshore, as they say, most of its manufacturing back from China, which is going to leave China with a bit of a hole in its economy. It's not going to be popular with them. And that leaves Scotland wondering whether to side with Mr. Musk or whether to stand more towards the European Union. And that is a difficult path to walk. I think the Scottish politicians here have to find some middle path to tread that keeps everybody on board and doesn't scare the horses too much. So difficult times are ahead, but if Alba can pull its act together and it gets its new leader and they set a manifesto for independence primarily, that aligns very well with the movement for independence, which we are all members of, and the efforts of the Independence for Scotland Party, which has also got independence right at the centre of all its policy making. Anyway, that is kind of a complicated analysis of what's going on in the world today. I'm going to stop the broadcast here because I think there's enough information to chew over for many days. But as usual, if you have comments to make, criticisms, suggestions, you can always send a message to me here on this channel or via email if you wish. I'm still always looking for donations to keep these programs going, so I welcome any donations of any size whatsoever. Links are available online. I'll post some more later today. That's it from Inde-Car today. As I always say, keep the faith. Things can only really get better from here, but we live in uncertain times and we need political parties which can provide some certainty. Bye for now.